Hello, my fellow kin. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to part 2 of 3 of the Team League event recap, where each week we'll do a deep dive breakdown on the game I played, the matchup I had, the role I had to play in the team context, how that game went, and of course, hopefully episode 3 concludes with us winning the event. As always, a massive thank you to our channel members, Jordan Stuckenschneider, The Pulp, Fusel, Sam P, Austri TM, Dabadakis, Travis Taylor, Aaron Easley, Smoky Miniatures, Mr. Wolf, Koromar, Chaos King Plays, Gregory Williams, and Realist Chance. Thank you guys so much. It really does mean a lot. Alright, so for those of you who did not see part 1, I would say just go back and watch part 1 so you have a little bit of context as to what I'm talking about in this week's video. And for those of you who did, a quick recap. The Team League consists of 4 teams of 4 players each. Each team and players will be playing 3 games each over the course of 3 weeks. The teams are led by high caliber players. They are balanced teams that were organized by the TO around player experience and skill level, and then the matchups were determined at the store by the teams themselves. Our team consisted of Space Marines with Gladius Task Force, Votann run by me, Imperial Agents, and Imperial Guard. Here's a quick snapshot of the list I was running, the exact same one from last week, and the same one I will likely be taking for the next one in part 3. I have a very detailed breakdown of my thoughts and considerations that went into this list, which you could watch in episode 1. For this week's pairings, our team faced a composition that had Blood Angels, Custodes, Space Wolves, and Dark Angels. And as a quick reminder here, I'll just call out that because this was organized by the TO and a lot of players didn't have access to different armies or didn't really want to play with different armies and practice with the ones they were using for competitive play, we allowed people to double up on certain factions inside of their team composition. In this case, it was a lot of Space Marines. Usually you would only have 1 Space Marine player per team, but because they're teams of 4, because it's really just like at the store and it was organized by the TO, we decided to allow people to just double up on it. I think this was the only team that had a double up happen, so there are 3 Space Marine armies in this team roster, so just something to note. All right, so for the pairing. So when we got there and we were trying to figure out like what we wanted our matchups to look like, for some very important context, the mission we were playing on was Purge the Foe. So this does mean that it's more of a killing mission, like armies that are better at killing or armies that give up Purge more easily will be impacted significantly more than something like just regular take and hold. In this case, we wanted to be a little bit more careful about how we match things up. We really wanted to avoid having Blood Angels play into Imperial Agents or Imperial Guard. And Space Wolves, a little bit less worried about them as there was more opportunity for move blocking. I believe the list had some Dreadnoughts and had Thunderwolf Cavalry, so there was some opportunity for some of our more defensive lists like Imperial Agents or Imperial Guard to move block and try to establish board control. But again, our priority here was probably trying to get Imperial Agents or Imperial Guard into Custodes. If Imperial Guard got in, it would probably hopefully be more of a blowout victory. And we also, of course, wanted to avoid having Blood Angels 20-0 one of our more squishy armies like Imperial Agents or Imperial Guard. So this was kind of like what we were on the watch list for. For myself as Votann, I felt like I had decent play into any one of these, Blood Angels being a little bit scarier, of course, but I felt like I would be able to act as a pretty good anvil into any of these and maintain a pretty even score. So we start with the pairings, and their first card that they put down is Dark Angels, and the card that we put down first is Imperial Agents. Now we flipped the cards over. The Dark Angels player wasn't present at this point, so we weren't entirely sure what he was running. Is it going to be Mass Deathwing Knights? Is it going to be something a little more conventional? Is it going to be running a different detachment? Gladius Task Force, for example. We really weren't all that sure. So we felt like it was a wild card pick, and it would probably be best to put Votann into it because I'd have the most even game out of everybody else, and of course trying to preserve our Space Marines player into playing into Blood Angels, who would have the strongest chance of outscoring them. So we end up putting Votann down into the Dark Angels, and on our end we put Imperial Agents as our face down card, and in response to that they had put Space Wolves and Blood Angels. So on our end, our second card that we had put down was Space Marines as well. So they end up picking Votann into Dark Angels. We get the matchup that we wanted to have, and on our end for Imperial Agents, I think we made a mistake. So they had put down Space Wolves and Blood Angels into the Imperial Agents, and we ended up going for the Space Wolf matchup, which was the lesser of two evils. I think we kind of set our Imperial Agent up for failure here. We probably should have reserved him for when we felt Custodies were going to be put down on the table instead, and try to secure that matchup, as this was probably the one where Imperial Agents would have the best chance of coming out on top, since all of these armies in the enemy team are much killier than what we had. So we end up choosing the lesser of two evils with the Space Wolves, and on their end they end up choosing Votann into Dark Angels, and the leftovers of Blood Angels and Space Marines get paired in together, and then the leftovers of Imperial Guard and Custodies get matched up as well. So overall, we're feeling pretty good about these. The only ones that we're a little bit iffy on is the Imperial Agents, the Space Wolves, but there wasn't really any other choice. I think we were banking on the Imperial Guard just blowing Custodies off the table in light terrain, which we end up securing for light terrain on that matchup, and it did prove to be quite helpful. All right, so we get to the table to set up. It's map 10, medium WTC, Crucible of Battle, and the mission, of course, is Purge the Foe. So you get 4 points for holding something, 4 points for killing something, 4 points if you hold more objectives than your opponent at the start of your turn, and then 4 points at the end of the round if you killed more than your opponent did. So in terms of lists, my opponent shows up and he's running Dark Angels in the Libraria's Conclave detachment, which is something that I actually didn't really know too much about. It was one of the Grotmus detachments for Space Marines, went under my radar a little bit. I didn't hear too much about it. I guess it wasn't super popular. At a first glance, when he was talking to me about it and I was like thinking over the rules and I played the game, I was like, like whatever, I don't really think it's that great. And then on the way home, I was actually like reflecting on it. I was like, you know what? There's some pretty nifty combos you could do. I actually think it's really fun. And it has a lot of flavor and play to it, which is actually pretty nice. That makes me all the more jealous that we got Hearthband for ours. Anyway, so I digress. In terms of lists, my opponent was running a pretty interesting one. So again, I had never played against this detachment before, and he was walking me through what some of the abilities are, some of the combos, things like that. Essentially, you start every round off by selecting from one of 5 different stances your army could be in. Each stance does something different, like one of them is +2 movement. I believe one of them increases the AP within a certain range. All of this affects librarian units. So you attach librarians to your squads to give them the librarian keyword or like the psyker keyword, whatever it is for that detachment, and then everybody benefits from these rules. So it's pretty cool. A lot of little interesting combos you could do, as we'll see in just a little bit. Sternguard in particular are quite scary in this, which is something I learned. Now, as for the list itself, he was running a Brutalis Dreadnought, which he had deployed over here at the top. He was running some intercessors, a big squad of 10 intercessors that he deployed over here with a character, I believe, one of the librarians. He had infiltrators that were in the back, squad of 5, screening out the backfield. He had 2 Vindicators, which he deployed over here on this side of the table. He had a big brick of Sternguard, which he had attached with a librarian. So these guys were a squad of 10 with the librarian, and they put out, like, I think there's an ability to give them rapid fire or like sustained hits, and they have 30 shots. The librarian gives them an enhancement ability which has dev wounds on 4s or 5s against vehicles. So these guys just put out massive quantity of shots, and then with Oath you get to reroll your hit roll, and the Sternguard get to reroll their wound rolls. So you really do get some massive damage that comes through, just wipe squads off the table. I think like on average you get about 20 mortal wounds, 20 devs that come out of this squad. So very powerful unit. We then have a squad of Inner Circle companions that are led by a character, I think another librarian, potentially, don't really remember. And then we have a squad of 10 assault intercessors on foot. So as you can see, my opponent deployed extremely aggressively to overload one side of the table. He went for my expansion objective with the big overload threats. He had nothing in reserves, and if we look over at his expansion objective over here, the one that just makes the most amount of sense for him to go for, he only had a Brutalis Dreadnought and a 10-man intercessor squad. Now, of course, I don't know this fully as we're deploying. We're deploying one thing at a time, of course, but you know, very quickly you start to see the image that there are a lot of things that are going to be pushing for my expansion objective very quickly. And on my end, I ended up going with a pretty standard deployment to start things off. I had put a squad of 5 warriors over here on my home objective, just kind of strung out this way. I didn't really need to screen because he had nothing in reserves, nothing goes up and down. So my game plan here was stick to the objective and then start sending these guys out this way, getting inside of whatever vehicle is on this wall, and then use that to propel wave after wave of units this way onto the objective, or towards the middle, of course. I then also identified that I really wanted to be in this little nook over here where it's quite safe from any firing lanes, especially turn 1, potentially even turn 2. So I ended up putting one Sagittar here with warriors inside to scout up this way towards the ruin. I then had a second Sagittar over here along this line for my deployment with warriors inside. His job, of course, was to scout up this way and just start applying some pressure to this objective and try to secure it earlier. My typical game plan when I go into these games is put most of my stuff towards my expansion, like my Hearthguard brick, and then I'll put the Berserks and like one land fortress up towards the expansion. So I kind of started deploying for that. And then as I saw that he was really overloading my expansion objective and his was quite weak, I had to readjust that a bit, and I ended up going with my Hearthguard inside of the land fortress on this side of the table, in this quadrant. So these guys were going to start pushing up because I identified that, it's really just a Brutalis and a squad of 10 intercessors. I could probably pick all that up with a land fortress and maybe a second one that's doing supporting fire. And then, of course, with the Hearthguard inside, it shouldn't really be an issue to clear. And then he doesn't really have anything else that could protect this objective, especially if I get behind, like somewhere over here, for example. It's basically mine for the whole game. So that was something I really wanted to push for, and not really what I usually do with my Hearthguard squad. Again, I prefer having them on this flank, pushing towards my expansion and just dominating it early. But it felt like I had to either had to match him and put everything on my side of the table, pushing for this objective where we would just fight, or I would have to switch the game plan up and just do like a rotation towards his. And I thought that as I was seeing all these things hit the table, they're big squads of Marines, 3 up base save, 2 wounds each. Like my army's fine into that, but they all have a 4 up invuln because of the librarians. They have access to stratagems that make me -1 to hit sometimes. I just thought, like, if we are trading on this objective and nobody's really controlling it, and then he has, of course, critically, which I forgot to draw, he has a squad of Deathwing Knights over here, just standing here like this. He was going to stand on the middle and hold this basically the whole game, and I had to dedicate a lot of firepower or a lot of OC to try to take it from him, in which case I decided I'm just going to push for this objective with my Hearthguard and take it. I then had 3 bikes that were over here. He had his Deathwing Knights that were on this objective here. His 2 Vindicators, his Sternguard brick. He had his Inner Circle Companions that were over here on the line, and then, of course, his Assault Intercessors, as I said earlier. And then on my end, I ended up putting 2 land fortresses. So I had one with Berserks and Warriors inside over here. I had an empty one that was over here on this side. So my plan was just reinforce this objective as things would charge through potentially, or push up this way and try to shoot him on the objective or in the middle of the table. I then had a lone character over here, my E-Champ, who was sitting on this inside of this ruin. This was probably one of my mistakes this game. I just feel like he didn't really do that much for me from here. I probably should have deployed him over here instead. That way, at least, turn 1, I could move up to this ruin. I'm safe from everything turn 1 as well. And then I'm in like a good staging spot. I could come help support the middle to trade, or I could push up this way as well. Or maybe I could have also put him in this ruin here so he could come out and like act as a countercharge measure. So this was a bit of an error on my side. I think I kept him a little bit too reserved. And he basically stayed here the entire game. He still had Appraising Lair, so he was still contributing, but it just felt like I was wasting 60 points when he could have also been a body helping to support my game plan. And then my last drop was 3 more bikes that were somewhere over here like this. Again, I didn't really have to screen for anything, so these guys, their job was just to help reinforce this flank. I had my Jaegers along this wall, 1 inch off the wall, because if he walks within 9, I could reactive move, and as long as I do a reactive move, a minimum of 1, I'm 2 inches off the wall, and he's going to have to charge through to land on this side, and then my whole army is waiting for him. So whatever he sends this way, I should be able to kill, and then if not, then I could push out and start reinforcing this flank, and again, whatever comes through, my whole army is ready to kill. So we roll off, and I get turn 1. I do my scout, so my Sagittar comes up this way. I send my other Sagittar up this way. These bikes end up coming in this little nook over here. And then these bikes end up staying over here because it's a pretty decent spot. Like, there's no reason to be too aggressive. I could do containment really safely over here if I wanted to, or sabotage, or recover assets, for example. And he can't really interact with me. Like, we had pre-measured, and for his Brutalis Dreadnought to come here, it would actually take him 2 turns to clear. and his intercessors, he would have to advance, and he would only be able to get a couple that would touch the objective if he rolled well on the advance roll. So I felt like this was pretty good. And then over here on this side, my plan was again just to kind of try to match him with the amount of resources he was putting and contest this objective as long as possible. Now I end up drawing Overwhelming Force and Engage on all fronts here. I do get the baby version of Engage with my Jaegers who were beyond the line, and I unfortunately can't get Overwhelming Force, which is not great because it's a great secondary card to draw, but just terrible to get turn 1. So I end up drawing that, unfortunately, and there isn't that much else I could do. So I just do a turn of staging. This land fortress over here moves up into this nook after the Sagittar does its regular move into this ruin. So now I'm perfectly staged here with my Sagittar. It's just sitting inside here with warriors. Next turn, I could send them out into the middle. I could send them out onto this objective, and I don't have to really worry about being interacted with because nothing in his army could reach this or fight it. I then move this land fortress up over here, staged behind this ruin, and this one, of course, contains the Hearthguard inside. I also end up bringing this land fortress out this way as far as I could, just so I'm hidden from this line. The Vindicator can't reach me. Even if the Vindicator decides to push towards the middle, he still can't see me. So I've staged this land fortress to be over here in this spot, and then this land fortress over here moves up and takes the spot of the original one. And that concluded my turn 1. It was pretty basic. I just went for hold 1 to get 4 points on my turn. I didn't really want to overextend too much over here because on his turn he was going to get it. I didn't want to make his charge on the Brutalis easy to get like around this corner because it would take him 2 turns to cross. I didn't want him to just propel off of me and then start pushing down. So I figured I would leave things off like this, play a little bit of a slower game and let him push towards me. So his turn 1, he draws Area Denial and Engage on all fronts, which was quite good for him. So he brings everything out on this side, very simply. He takes his Brutalis over here inside the ruin. He takes his intercessors. He does manage to get a pretty nice advance roll here, and he gets, I believe, 2 intercessors on this objective, 2 or 3. So he has a couple models standing on it at OC6. His Brutalis doesn't quite reach it. And then over here he has his Deathwing Knights come out. They make a really nice advance roll, and he manages to land them like over here. So his Deathwing Knights are just standing in the middle of the center of the table. And this does get him Area Denial. So I made a really big mistake here. It's something that was one of my goals I really wanted to practice this year. It's just paying a little bit more attention to denying secondaries. And I was able to do this had I just been 1 inch closer to the wall. Like I should have just said, oh, like if my opponent draws Area Denial, I want to be 1 inch closer. So at least I'm within 6 of the center. And then he's going to only get the baby version of the score on this unless he kills my Sagittar, which he can't do if he advances to get here. So had I just been 1 inch closer, I would have been able to deny some amount of points. So that is something that's a pretty big takeaway, I think. It's something very important to practice and pay attention to, and something I'm definitely going to keep working on, because had I just been 1 inch closer, which I totally could have been, I would have denied some points for free. So unfortunately, I didn't do that, in which case he did get Area Denial for 5 points and was just standing here out in the open. Now, on this side of the table, this is where threat overload really happens. So he brings his Assault Intercessors out. He advances them this way. So now the big brick is standing somewhere like this over here. Can't quite reach the objectives. Inner Circle Companions, same thing. He brings them out over here. Again, I decided not to advance my Jaegers because I did not want to make him get an easy move, charge, consolidate onto this objective. Currently, he was unable to reach it. So he just manages to toe on with, I think, 2 of his Inner Circle Companions on this objective. So something just like that, like 2 of them touch it. And I do a reactive move because it's within 9, and I just shuffle a little bit more to get 5 OC on this objective instead. So I have 5 OC on this in the back, so this is mine, and I still hold it on the start of my turn. He advances the Stern Guard up as well, so he's like towed into this ruin over here. He's standing like this, and the Stern Guard are just kind of ready to start playing with this objective. And he's just playing really aggressive, basically, and just trying to push into my DZ. And then over here, his Vindicator moves up this way. This Vindicator moves up this way. So everything is kind of just like overloaded on this side. And at this point, I realized that I probably should have stuck with my initial plan of like just seeing where he was loading things up on and probably just focusing on rotating this way instead to match him. His army is relatively slow. He doesn't have any transports. They're just marine bodies. He doesn't have advance and charge or advance and shoot and things like that. So all I really had to do was keep distance, give him this, and stall here as much as possible, and then just like focus on getting these for hold more. And then it probably would have been a bit of an easier game. So in any case, we go back to my turn. So he scores Area Denial. He scores his Engage for 2 points because he's over here now. And then this is where I decide to make things a little bit more interesting. So I don't want all of this to crash into my backfield next turn. So what I do is I send my Jaegers out this way. I advance them out, and I make a nice line that's like something like this. Like you could get some pretty sweet distance with these guys. So I make a nice line that looks like this. He ends up overwatching. I think he picks up like 2 Jaegers with a Vindicator. It doesn't break my coherency, so I'm still able to. I end up just losing like, I think some guys here. I would rather have the Assault Intercessors crash than the Companions, so I end up staying like this. And then on this side, I get a little bit greedy. So I put 3 bikes that are here. I bring them out onto this ruin like this. And I try to put my shots on my shooting phase into the Intercessor squad to try to whittle it down. Because remember, this is Purge the Foe. So he's going to start killing things and just racking up 4 points. And I am not going to be able to compete with that, because he has big bricks of 10 models each. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to try just whittling down as much as I can. If I could pick up like half the squad for each squad, like over the course of 2 turns, then late game, I just keep getting kill more super reliably, and he doesn't have enough activations to match me in return. So I bring my bikes out here, and I'm like, I'm probably going to pick up like 5 Assault Intercessors or something, like half the squad. Oh yes, and for tokens, the Intercessors are judged, the Assault Intercessors. I judge the Inner Circle Companions, I judge the Stern Guard brick, and I judge, of course, the Deathwing Knights in the middle of the table. So I don't judge anything here for very good reason, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Now, over on this side, I have another problem to deal with. I have Deathwing Knights that are just sitting in the middle and like basically unshiftable. So I said, you know what? I'm going to put everything I have into these guys and try to pick them up. It's the first time I play into Deathwing Knight, so I was a bit unfamiliar with the math as to how many shots I would need. But I end up bringing this Land Fortress out here like this one out here like this, and then this Land Fortress stays here in this spot. I think I just pivot so I have like an easier time on my next turn pushing up this way. And I put all 3 of these into the Deathwing Knights. Now, I think in hindsight, I potentially could have gotten my Hearthguard out to support, or brought these 3 bikes instead that were fighting these Assault Intercessors. I could have instead brought them up towards the middle to help support into the Deathwing Knights. Now, Deathwing Knights have a pretty nasty profile because they're -1 damage, so they're quite tough, even when they're double judged, because your Land Fortresses, each Conversion Beamer shot actually requires 2 successful wound rolls to do a kill, versus just 1, because they have 4 wounds each, but they reduce damage by 1, so your 4 damage shots become 3 damage. So I end up putting all 3 forts in my shooting phase into this. But before we get to that here, I'll just say I end up throwing my warriors out onto this to stall on primary. So I get 10 OC onto this objective to his 6, which means I take it from him. And he doesn't have any means to overwatch with anything, because his Brutalis Dreadnought is not sticking out or being wholly within. So he can't shoot this squad. So I'm just basically trying to match him at this point. And then for shooting, I put everything from my 3 land forts into the Deathwing Knights. And I think this is a little bit below average. I didn't run the numbers on it, but I end up killing just 2 out of the 5 Knights. So that was a little bit interesting, because I probably wasn't going to kill all of them, but I did feel like I should have picked up probably 4 of them. I end up just getting 2, which was absolutely brutal, because now I'm fully exposed. So something I could have potentially done instead here is just advanced this land fortress out. Instead of coming this way, advanced it this way onto the objective, so not shot with it, and instead just try to out-OC him by being OC5 to his OC6, because he had a character leading them. And then with the other 2 land fortresses shooting into this squad, probably kill one of the knights, which would have meant I out-OC him, or at the very least match him, so that on his turn I deny primary again. So I would be denying primary here and here. So that's, I think, something else I should have maybe considered doing instead. I know now that I cannot pick up a full squad of Deathwing Knights with 3 land fortresses. A little bit funny to think about, but I think the play instead was to just get pressure on this in terms of OC, and then just try to stall like that. And then I have Berserks and Warriors standing in the middle, so if he does kill my land fortress, I have a squad of warriors that can screen the charge for the Deathwing Knights, still act as OC if he doesn't get through them or for some reason doesn't charge, and then I can use the Berserks behind them as a counter charge with heroic intervention to try to pick up more of the knights. So on this side, like I said, I end up shooting the 3 bikes into the assault intercessors. I just pick up 2 assault intercessors that are double judged. I even pop sustain hits too, just to whittle them down a little bit more. So this was really underperformed for me in this activation. And now I expose myself to a Vindicator for nothing and to the assault intercessors, which surely would be able to try to make this charge after my Jaegers fall. So for secondaries, I end up scoring Storm Hostile Objective over here. And I end up discarding my assassination that I drew because it was just impossible, since all of these dudes have squads of 10 attached to a character as bodyguards. My opponent's turn 2, he draws Defend, Stronghold, Secure, No Man's Land for primary. He's of course holding 1, he's holding 2, and then he's going to obviously get more kills than I did. So what he does is he ends up moving his Stern Guard to reposition them a little bit behind my Jaeger line, just so he gets full line of sight on my Land Fortress. Over here, he has 1 Vindicator shoot into the bikes that are towed into this ruin. Again, big misplay on my part. He picks up 2 of the bikes, leaving 1 alive. The other Vindicator shoots into the Jaeger squad, killing everything but just 1. So I have 1 Jaeger standing over here in front of the Inner Circle companions. On this side of the table, he ends up taking the bait. He brings out his intercessors to this side of the wall and picks up all 5 of my warriors, giving them a single token. This, again, part of the game plan, which is why I did not judge anything here, because I knew with only 2 pieces he will have to interact with this. And then I will put a Praising Glare here, since everything on this side of the table is already judged, meaning that all I need to do is get him to kill 1 thing, get a token, and then suddenly he's double judged in my turn, which is exactly what happens. So he takes the bait here, kills this, gets a token on his intercessors. His Brutalis Dreadnought starts pushing up this way to try to play with my bikes, and makes it over here. My bikes are like kind of like on this side, so I pulled them back on my turn to make it just a little bit harder for him to get a charge off. I think it ended up being like a 10 or like an 11-inch charge to reach them, and I was totally happy with that, because for him to charge these bikes, he would have to come all the way around here or all the way around here, which was perfect for me. In the center, he takes his Deathwing Knights and brings them up this way, making a line here ready to charge into my Land Fortress if it survives for some reason. And then we go to his shooting phase. So again, picks up the Jaegers here, leaves 1 alive. The Inner Circle companions charge it, kill it, consolidate onto this objective. So they are now sitting comfortably in the middle here, just like this. And then over here, the Assault Intercessors end up failing to charge into the single bike, but the Jaegers did do their job in terms of stopping movement, so the Assault Intercessors were kind of stuck over here now, just kind of like standing here. And then over here with the Stern Guard, this is where I kind of was a little bit surprised at the output. So he puts the Stern Guard brick into the Land Fortress and he blows it up. He kills the Land Fortress in 1 activation with a Stern Guard brick, because this was his Oath of the Moment target, so he was getting reroll full hits. He had sustained hits. He had like 30 shots. And then for the wounds, they reroll all their wound rolls. And then it's like anti-vehicle 4 or 5, I think. So he's just like fishing for devs. And he ends up just popping the Land Fortress, like clean open. So that really took me by surprise. Something to keep in mind if you ever play against this army is that the Stern Guard brick is actually a powerhouse. And so I'm down a Land Fortress, and I have my Berserks and my Warriors kind of just like standing over here. So I have like my Berserks here. I have my Warriors that were over here, kind of like making a little line. And I lose a fort. So pretty solid turn for my opponent. He's in a good place. I'm not really sure how to deal with the threats on this side of the table, so it was time for me to get a little bit more creative. Turn 3, I score my 4 for holding something, and I figured that this is time for me to try to swing this back in my favor because it's looking bad. We have our teammates coming to see what's going on, get an assessment on the scores compared to their games, and it's looking like it's very heavily favored for the Space Marine player at this time, just looking at board state. Didn't really want that to happen, didn't want to let my team down here, and didn't want to lose. So I figured I would have to get a little bit creative and come up with an interesting play. So my biggest thing was I do not want to get shot by Stern Guards ever again. So how do I stop that from happening? I cannot kill this unit, and I need to get some kind of kills and stall primary here as much as possible. So I decide this is time to just collapse on this flank and secure this for the rest of the game, turn 3 onwards. So what I do is I disembark, move my Hearth Guards out this way. Again, he doesn't have anything that could really overwatch me. His Brutalis is positioned in a way that can't actually get line of fire because he's behind on this side of the wall. So I do that on this side. And then over here, my Land Fortress pokes out a little bit over here to be able to see both targets. I have my Sagittar that comes out this way over here like this. And then I have my 3 bikes, which poke out over here like this. Again, they're totally safe from a Vindicator because even with 1 extra turn of movement, there's no way for him to make it over here in time and get line of sight. So everything on this side comes out and is ready to interact here. I put Appraising Glare on this objective and I start shredding him. So I put the 3 bikes into this squad. I put the Land Fortress 2 big boys into the Brutalis, everything else into the Intercessors. The Sagittar puts everything into the little guys as well. I decide not to put anything into the Brutalis Dreadnought because I'm banking on charging it instead and then killing it and consolidating onto this objective and securing it. So that's exactly what I end up doing. I wipe the squad of Intercessors that are here. I secure Purge points. I end up doing the Dev Wound Guns on the Hearthguard into the Brutalis Dreadnought, take it down to like 4 wounds with the support of the Land Fortress, charge it with the Sagittar first so that no matter what, I am touching this objective, and then I charge it with the Hearthguard as well, finish it off in melee, and get a couple more bodies onto this objective. So now I have 2 units standing on this objective. I have a Sagittar that is empty, and I have a brick of Hearthguard that are over here, and he does not have any real response to this. Over here on this side, I end up shooting with 1 more Land Fortress into the Deathwing Knights, and I try to charge it with my Berserks. I use the Mole Grenade Launcher on the Inner Circle Companions. I don't believe it goes off. And this is where I started to be creative. So I bring this Land Fortress, who's like, at this point, kind of like over here. I bring him up this way towards the Stern Guard, which are like kind of standing here. I shoot into the Deathwing Knights that are here, get some value out of him. I end up picking up 1 more knight, so he's down to 2 knights at this point. And then I decide to charge into the Stern Guard brick with my Land Fortress. Why did I do that? Because his army, despite all its cool tricks, does not have access to fall back and shoot, which is massive. That means no matter what he decides to do over here, he will lose 1 activation 100% with his Stern Guard brick for a turn. And that is exactly what I needed. I just needed to stall those activations. And on my turn, I could pay CP to fall back, shoot, and charge. If he falls back and I survive, I'm going to keep charging him and I'm going to tie him up. So there was no way for him to interact with my Land Fortress anymore with his Stern Guard brick, which has the capacity to pick it up fully in a round of shooting. So at the end of my turn, this is kind of what board state looks like over here. And critically, I'm also blocking very easy access to this side of the map. His Stern Guard are going to have to take a turn to fall back this way, then move up this way, and then, hopefully a 3rd turn to get onto this objective. And by then the game's over. So these guys are basically out of the game. They can only play for this objective. Over here, my warriors then take a turn to come out and stand on this objective over here on this side of the wall, just stacking OC, and again, denying him more primary. I don't really care about killing anything there. Purge is going to be quite difficult for me, but I did secure it on this flank, so I have just stuff stacking on this side of the wall, securing more primary for myself, sending them out in waves. Over here in the middle of the table, the Deathwing Knights are kind of making a line with their couple of remaining models and their character here, stopping me from moving on to the objective. So I decided to charge it with everything. My warriors, my berserkers, get everything on them. And I'm like, surely I'll be able to pick up 2 Deathwing Knights and then consolidate onto this objective with a full squad of berserks. I do the charge, I make it with everything, and then I end up only killing a single knight in combat. So again, pretty brutal. Had I been able to kill them, which I think on average at this point it should definitely have been possible with a Land Fortress that shot and then Berserks following up and charging in, I should have been able to wipe that and just consolidate onto this. Unfortunate, the dice didn't work in my favor here. So I have everything here tied up on like 1 Deathwing Knight and a character that are left. So we go on to my opponent's turn 3, and suddenly it's looking like it's much more in my favor. Over here, his Stern Guard are tied up. He decides, interestingly, this was, I think, a big mistake on his part. He decides to keep the Stern Guard in combat with me because these guys do have a pistol that has the ability to, with the Dev Wounds as well. So he stays in combat with me and just keeps trying to whittle down my Land Fortress. And he keeps doing like maybe like 4 or 5 wounds at a time to me. And it's fine because I don't really care. As long as I could keep him here for like 1 or 2 more turns, the game's over and I win. So I just took it. I didn't really mind. And he was slowly picking up some wounds here, but I was ultimately alive, and I just stopped him from interacting with this unit on anywhere else on the board, which was great. So I think this was a mistake. He probably should have just sacrificed a turn, tried to fall back, pick it up with a Vindicator or something, send his Inner Circle Companions up, do anything to try to slow this down and stop it from tagging his Stern Guard. But unfortunately, he decided, well, fortunately for me, he decided to keep his Stern Guard in combat with it. And over here, he does his movement, so he just like kind of reshuffles some stuff. He brings his assault intercessors out this way, and his inner circle companions are kind of like over here like this. I have my warriors on this side of the wall. Over here, his vindicator comes up this way and gets onto this objective. And then over here, this vindicator comes up this way and is like standing over here, touching this objective as well. He does his movement. He has nothing on this side of the table. He's conceded it to me fully. In the middle, we're fighting, but I should be able to take it from him after. And then over here, I end up rapid ingressing my squad of Hearthguard on this side of the wall. And I do this on purpose because if he wants to take this objective from me, he's going to have to charge. And if he does charge, he's on this side of the wall afterwards. And I get to fight him on my turn, pick him up, charge into whatever's left over, and then grab this objective. So I let him get the charge onto my bike. I let him take it. So he does have his intercessors that are standing here. He has his inner circle companion, which is kind of like stretched out like this, like on this side of the wall, whoever was able to tag, and like some over here. So he kills my warriors, he kills my bike. I don't care. Next turn on my end, all I have to do is wipe these squads and secure the win. And that's exactly what I do. I end up drawing no prisoners and behind enemy lines. And this is where things just kind of like collapse on my opponent. I send these bikes up in the air before I draw, of course. They land over here because, again, he has nothing here. So I move these Hearthguard up behind the wall. They're safe. This Sagittar over here ends up just moving up this way. And I'm like, okay, you know, I have like 2 turns left. I'll just bring this here 1 turn. Then turn 2, he's here on this objective. And I get it. Oh, yes, and at the end of his turn, I end up fighting first over here because he's still in combat with me since he's surrounded by my guys. And I end up picking up all of his Deathwing Knights and his character this time around, and I consolidate my Berserks onto this objective. I unfortunately couldn't get all of them on, and I couldn't auto-see the Vindicator, so we were tied over here. And then on his turn, he ends up charging the Vindicator into my Berserks to pin them and stop more people from getting onto this objective. Anyway, so back to my turn. So on my turn, over here, I bring the Sagittar down, and I was like, since his Vindicator is over here, like holding the flank just through like its physical body, my next turn I'll just like come up and land here and take this from him. And then my Hearthguard hide behind this wall, and they are good for the rest of the game, getting me points on this objective. So I bring my bikes up into the air, and this is like my collapse turn. So I bring them over here, bring my bikes down here, get line of sight, rip everything into the infiltrators. It doesn't matter if I don't kill them because next turn I'm just going to walk onto this with 6 OC and it's mine and I basically win the game. And then over here my Hearthguard end up putting everything, all their shots into the assault intercessors, pick up the rest of the squad because they're double judged, and I pop sustained hits too. And then I charge into the inner circle companions, do the dev wounds, and then I just collapse on him with my melee attacks, finish off the squad. There were only like, at this point, I think 5 models and a character. So I kill them quite easily. There's like 1 guy left, and then I consolidate onto this objective, and it is mine. So all he has left going into his turn 4 at this point, so all my opponent has left at this point going into his next turn is a Vindicator that is standing here, a Vindicator that is standing here, Infiltrators, and his Stern Guard. Everything else is dead. So I'm feeling pretty good about the game at this point. It was really heavily favored for him at the start, the first 2 turns. But I played a really slow game, just kind of like had to reassess my game plan, adjusted it pretty quickly, which I'm happy for, that I was able to pick up on that, and then pushed for a big collapse at the end here and just try to pick up as many resources as I could. So my opponent does what he could, of course. He stays in combat here with the Berserks. He ends up shooting into them. The Berserks are tanks, and they just manage to shrug with the feel no pains. I keep like 2 Berserks alive still, and then here he shoots his Vindicator into my Hearthguard. He picks up a few models, but I don't really care at this point because he doesn't have anything else that could stop them. This Land Fortress here, he decides to still stay in combat with me at this point because he's committed the turn and he's already wasted 1 activation, so he just stays and tries to finish me off. He's unsuccessful in doing so. So on my turn, I pay CP to fall back, shoot, and charge. I push up this way. This Land Fortress comes up this way, collapse on this Vindicator. I fall back with the Berserks, shoot everything into it. It dies. He has nothing left in the middle of the table here. And then literally all he has left are Stern Guard, Infiltrators, which will die. We called it here because, of course, I just walk onto this and kill them, or if anything, just auto-see him and he can't kill me. So this comes up here, secured this objective. So I've taken this, I've taken this, I've taken this, and I've taken this. So all that's left is this objective now, and I end up having just my Hearthguard here that are still fighting. I end up just conceding that he would probably pick up. I'd give him this Land Fortress. He'd pick it up. Maybe he'd pick up the Hearthguard if he's lucky. But at that point, the game's over and he has nothing left. So we call it in turn 5. and I end up ultimately getting a 13-7 victory. So a very tight game in the early game. I felt like I was probably going to lose this one. And to be honest with you, I think had I not figured out the play of dealing with this Stern Guard brick by charging my Land Fortress into them repeatedly, I definitely probably would have lost. Because this unit was insane. There was no way I was going to get through it, and it was able to pick up a Land Fortress every turn. So I think the big thing was identifying what the biggest threat is to my army and trying to shut it down. And, sometimes you have to be creative with that. And I think this was a really good example of that I'm pretty happy I found this play here, which I do think lended me the ability to win the game. And then in the top, of course, just leveraging the trade war to be able to dominate this objective, because he just literally did not have the resources to maintain even trades. So I ended up just taking this from him as well. So overall, I think the game went pretty well. I made a couple big mistakes, of course. Like I said, I put one character here who did nothing the whole game. He should have been closer to this side, or he should have been closer to this side to help support and do something. Had he been here, for example, I probably would have killed the Deathwing Knights a turn earlier with the Mortal Wounds, and then I would have been able to take this for an extra turn, and then probably get a few more points as well. So I think ultimately what I'm trying to say is that because it's a team event, it's not enough to just say, yeah, like I won, great. I think it's really about like getting the biggest point differential that you can. And this, I think, was a mistake. There was no point in keeping this character here. There was no point in bringing 3 bikes out and giving 4 points away for Purge. I should have just stayed more defensive, let him come to me, stick with the original game plan, and maintain as much safety as I can, reduce the ability for him to kill me as early and as much as possible. All right, so wrapping up game 2 for our team, we end up getting the Guard versus Custodes win 11-9. We end up getting the Votann versus Dark Angels win at 13-7, and then the Space Marines versus Blood Angels win at 13-7 as well. But unfortunately, we lost the Imperial Agent matchup to Space Wolves at 0-20. So this was our only loss defeat here. It's not the Imperial Agent player's fault, it's the team's fault. I think we really did a disservice putting him down first into an aggressive composition, because obviously they're going to put 2 armies that would table Imperial Agents and Purge the Foe. And I think we just didn't consider that. We probably should have tried to get him into the Custodes player and then tried to get Guard into Space Wolves if possible. That probably would have been more of an even game. Or into Dark Angels as well. I think Imperial Agents might have had a chance there too, to maintain a little bit more of an even score. So overall, we end up with a slight defeat of 37-43. But fear not, all hope is not yet lost for the Ancestors, because we do have one more game left. Game 3, the final team matchup, and hopefully we win that one and come out on top, first place. All right, so this is a little bonus clip that I'm adding in post. I thought it would be helpful if we just look at my list so far. Now, I'm recording this after we finished our 3rd game, and after I played against Marines a couple more times, so I do have an opinion building on how I think Votann fare in this new Marine meta, at least until Eldari come out and they pose new problems for us. But I do think for now, I think there are some changes that I would make to this list, considering how Marines play and what kind of tools we now need to deal with them more effectively. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about changes I'd make to this list, just within the context of this game that I played in episode 2. And then I think at the end of part 3 next week, that's when I'm going to break this down into more detail, explain more of my reasoning for the changes, what changes I would make exactly, and what I would recommend maybe people trying out if they're having trouble into Marines, and some things that I want to test out as well. So just real quick here, within the context of this game specifically, without knowing what happens in game 3 or in the other games I played into Marines after recording these videos, I think right out the gate here, the first thing I felt that I lacked was more consistent damage. That's always been a big problem with Votann, is that we're very swingy, right? Like conversion beamers will either do 12 damage or they'll do 0 damage. There's like no in between, right? And I feel like a lot of the times what ends up happening is you get one that's a sustained crit, the other one just misses, and then you roll to wound, you miss one, there's only like 2 saves that go in, they make one, you deal 4 damage. And that could spike, but I think sometimes you just need something a little bit more consistent. And I think you could apply this same logic to the Ioneer Champion. The Ioneer Champion is interesting because historically we see a lot of mass hammers being run. And I think after this game, realizing that I wanted more consistency, I wanted more attacks, I think the change I would make here is subbing 2 of my Ioneer Champion's weapons from mass hammer to the Dark Star Axe. Why is that? The Dark Star Axe is 6 attacks at a BS of 2. So the weapon skill is just natively better. You're already hitting on 2s. You're not token reliant. You have more attacks that go through, so you're more consistent. You're only missing on 1s. If they're double judged, you're still wounding on 2s for marine bodies. And usually, that if they're not, you'll be wounding on 3s. So this is a pretty nasty profile because 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, no tokens, and then minus 2 AP, 2 damage flat. So if you do have tokens, you can bump this up, of course, to like AP3, AP4. The Marines basically don't get a save unless they pop Armor of Contempt here, and I think this is just really solid to have. Like, if you think about it, the E-Champ can charge in with his unit. He does mortal wounds on the charge. On average, you're doing 2 mortals, you pick up a Marine body. Then you're going in with 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, if they're not judged. And you could potentially wipe a full 5-man Marine squad with just the E-Champ alone. So even taking this on the solo E-Champ, if you're running one, with a Dark Star Axe, I think is the play. Because this guy could have a significant impact on the game, doing the mortals on the charge, swinging with his axe, and just wiping a full 5-man squad. I would still keep one hammer. I think I would put the hammer inside of the Land Fortress squad, just because usually that's like closer to the action. And when I do rapid ingress my other Hearthguard brick, I'm usually looking to reinforce a flank, and that's typically involved with having infantry fights. So I think I want to have that Dark Star Axe inside of the squad that comes down from Deep Strike and on the E-Champ that's solo. Those, for now, just within the context of this game, are the only changes I would make. We'll talk about this in a lot more detail at the end of next week's video. Alright guys, thanks so much for tuning in to part 2 of 3. We have 1 episode left. Tune in next week to find out if my team wins it all. I hope you found this helpful. This is my first team experience as well, so I've been learning a lot as I've been going through this and kind of just figuring out Votann's place in the team meta as I practice for my first team event, my real event that's happening in March of this year. As always, a big thank you to our channel members, our Discord community, which you could join free of charge by following the link down in the description below, and the channel sponsor Card Brawlers, a fantastic gaming store for all your Warhammer needs. If you're interested in checking them out, they have great prices, great inventory, and offer international shipping. Please do so using my affiliate link down in the description below. Any support really helps a lot. As always, if you enjoyed this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment for me down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.